Ahead of the John Peel lecture, Brian Eno paid a visit to the John Peel archive at Peel Acres. Over the next hour, you can hear what he discovered and the impact that John Peel had on Brian and music culture.
Without John Peel, I don't think I would have a career in music, really. First of all, a lot of the things that I listened to and had a big influence on me, I first heard on John Peel. For instance, the Velvet Underground. I think I actually first heard that on his Radio London programme. So that was pre-BBC. And I've established the date of that was August the 17th, 1967. That was the time he first played a Velvet Underground track. And I'm pretty sure that's when I heard it, because I bought the album around about that time. And that was like a lightning bolt for me. I mean, nobody else in England would have played the Velvet Underground at that time. And that really changed how I thought about the possibilities of pop music, because the drummer of the Velvet Underground, Maureen Tucker, was a non-musician, basically. And the viola player, of course, viola and piano, was John Cale, who came out of a musical tradition that I was interested in, which was American experimental music. So he'd worked with Lamont Young. So this was the first band that I was aware of that had really combined experimental art music with rock music. And that was what I thought I wanted to do. So that's really my first connection with John Peel. Because of him, I guess, I had that idea to make a new kind of music like that. Where are the numbers on here? Do you just pull one out and find it? Okay, so back. 1, 4, 3, 6. There we are, look at that. There we are. That's the record, and I didn't know anybody else who had the album for years. It's rather like a sort of religious relic, isn't it? subsequently, when I did join a band, Roxy Music, we had an amazing stroke of luck. We were booked on one of our very earliest gigs, 5th or 6th gig, to support Genesis at, I think it was the Greyhound in Croydon or somewhere like that. And it was a terrible gig for us because I used to, at this time, be off stage. I'd stand at the back of the hall because I was mixing and doing synthesizer and doing backing vocals from the mixer, which always puzzled the audience, who'd sort of keep looking around this guy singing behind them. During the show, Andy stepped back and stepped on the little junction box which had the mics feeding into it, and he crushed the connection on Brian's mic, the lead singer's mic, and I realized immediately what happened. So I went to the front of the auditorium and I spent the gig on the floor holding the connection together like that. I had to just hold it absolutely still. As soon as I moved, the mic would cut out. And that was the show he saw. And he then invited us to appear on Top Gear, which was absolutely amazing, really. We didn't have a record company, we didn't have a manager, we didn't have anything, actually. It was completely out of the blue. Though we had been rehearsing mostly in my bedroom for the previous year and a half. So we were a well-drilled band, but we had no following and no prospects at that time. So we went to the Top Gear studio and we recorded 6 songs. This was the first time we'd ever really recorded something well. I mean, I'd made a few demos because I had tape recorders and so on, but they weren't well recorded. You know, this was the first time we'd actually been in a proper studio. And that was broadcast, and a lot of people heard it, and because of that, Richard Williams, the writer, wrote quite a big piece about us in the Melody Maker. This was also unusual. A band that nobody had heard of and nobody could buy the records of or anything should have a big piece in the Melody Maker. I seem to remember it was a half page. So that really started our career. I think he did it for more people than just us. I think quite a few people had that kind of experience of him spotting potential. I mean, he must have been very good at that because we were a pretty untidy prospect at that time. We were just inexperienced, you know, we hadn't done a lot of shows, so I think we were probably quite stiff on stage. Nonetheless, the material was strong and we were certainly unusual. I didn't realise actually how unusual we were until I listened to that first album again about a year ago, because we'd been working on that music for so long that it's just sounded completely normal to us. And in fact, I remember being in the studio and thinking, Jesus, this is so normal. We've got to do something a bit more brave than this. And then I heard the album again last year and I thought, that really was a weird album. It was really quite different. You know, the palette of instruments was so odd, with oboe and synthesizer and Brian's beautiful, strange voice. You know, it was an unusual record. Now I'm about to meet Leon, who is the archivist here. Hi, Leon.
Hello.
So, this archive starts, what, in the 60s, is it?
Yes, the first records that appear are from the 60s, and then it continues right through until the mid-2000s. There's over 100,000 records here.
Wow.
Which we have the privilege of archiving. They are arranged on the shelf in chronological order, so you can get a real sense of when records were released and which records were released at the same kind of time. Okay, so the first record in the collection is Mike Absalom's Save the Last Gherkin for Me. The first few thousand records are actually filed alphabetically, but I think John soon realised that he would have a problem in continuing to file them alphabetically, so developed a system where they're all numbered and typed out separate file cards for each record.
Did he do that?
Yes, he did that by hand, and he typed every track name.
It's very nice the way actually every LP has a little number on it that he's written on in his extremely nice handwriting, I must say.
Yeah.
It's got lovely handwriting. Are there sort of significant holes that you notice, things that aren't in here that should be, or you think could have been if somebody else had been curating it?
No, not at all. I think this is one of the most complete cross-genre collections possibly in the world, and certainly one of the most important. You know, these are the actual records that were played on the radio for people to hear and then become musicians or just enjoy listening to the music.
Yeah.
These are the actual pieces of plastic, and I think that's pretty mind-blowing. There's more things here that you'd be surprised that are here, because they're not necessarily things that John would have been known for playing on the air, but he obviously still had an interest in collecting them.
Like, is there any Bruce Springsteen?
I haven't come across any.
I know he wasn't a fan of Bruce, or in fact of you too.
Yes,
or actually of me in particular, I don't think. So he does have all my records here, but I think he always thought I was a bit pretentious. There's lots of really great blues records here.
Yes, you do get sort of caches of.
Yeah.
Obviously, he would have obtained those all at the same time.
Yeah,
there's a big
right.
section of Blue Note records somewhere in here. But yeah, it's incredible just to see the way that the records are organised and get a real idea of, oh, this came out around the same time as this record, because they're together on the shelves. And
that's what's interesting, I think, seeing which things sit together and you think, wow, were they really at the same time?
Yeah.
And then, of course, seeing all these things that have completely disappeared from memory. This is an album called The Rural Blues, which I first heard in, well, I think either late 1964 or early 1965. Every single thing on it was new to me. It was that time in the mid-60s when English people discovered the blues. Americans hadn't. It was when it came over here that people like the Rolling Stones, for instance, picked up on it and thought this is an amazing kind of music, and in fact started doing covers of it, turning them into hits. Let me just tell you, it's got Booker's Jitterbug Swing, I remember that. Oh, and Blind Willie Johnston, Nobody's Fault But Mine. And it absolutely changed my life. You know, I knew nothing of any of these people on here. They all had strange names like Booker White and Kokomo Arnold and Furry Lewis, Lil Son Jackson. These were rural blues singers. Some of them were quite well known at the time among black people. They were absolutely unknown among American record buyers. And in fact, when this record came to England, that's when it took off. English people heard this completely exotic music, people like me, and thought, wow, where did this come from? I remember going to a concert, actually. I was 17, and the concert was Jesse Fuller, who was a blind street singer who played a one-man band. He had a sort of cymbal and kick drum attached to his foot. He played harmonica and guitar. So he did the whole thing, and he had this one song that everybody knew at the time, in England anyway, in my circle, which was called San Francisco Bay Blues. some bright promoter got him over to England, and I saw him play at the Ipswich Gaumont, not very far from here. The friends I was with, who were all older than me, kind of knew the promoter, so got backstage. And so we got to meet Jesse Fuller, who was about 75 at the time, and he was sitting in a chair looking absolutely baffled. And he said, "What just happened there?" And he'd only been playing on street corners before that, you know, busking basically. And he comes to England and there's 2,000 or 3,000 kids there treating him like a star, you know. He was absolutely astonished by the whole thing. So the blues came to England, and then a whole movement in England came out, you know, with John Mayall and the Rolling Stones and Clapton as well, that came out of that blues scene. And then we exported it back to America. See, they don't know. The media situation in America is so totally miserable. They would never play anything like that. You know, it's so niched. You know, you're either going to be in contemporary adult country folk or rock or something like that. That'll be one station. Then there's another one which is retro, disco, blah, blah, blah. There's never anything like the BBC where you might tune in and you get something from 1970, something from Uganda in 2012 or something. This is a singer called Blind Willie Johnson. The song is called Nobody's Fault But Mine. But this voice, Jesus, this is a voice. Now let me see if I can find it. Now you have to put yourself into 1964. On the radio there's Cliff Richards and Craig Douglas and people like that, all singing in their nice English voices. And then you hear this.
Nobody's fault but mine. Nobody's fault but mine. Power in my soul belong. I have a Bible in my home. I have a Bible in my home. Power in my soul belong. Father taught me how to read. Father taught me how to read. Power in my soul belong. Nobody's fault but mine. Oh, Lord. Nobody's fault but mine. Power in my soul belong. I have a Bible of my own, power in my soul belong. Oh, mother, she taught me how to read.
Okay, my name is Iggy Pop. This is the Confidential Show. Hey, boy, that's tight and just a cool groove. I'm gonna play music. Allows everybody to have a psychic peek. Plug your ears.
Well, there, I say.
The show is confidential. You've been participating in an experiment in intercontinental relations.
Iggy Confidential.
That's beautiful music.
Catch up now at the Six Music website.
It's a very wet day in Suffolk. We're just crossing the garden and we're going into the singles archive, and I'm hoping that in there I shall find some treasures from the past. Because there was a time when there were only singles, and then in about the 50s, I suppose, people started collecting singles together and putting them on albums. But even the time of the Beatles, really, there weren't bands going out to make albums as such. They would generally make a lot of singles and then stick them together with all the B-sides onto an album. Ah, records. What a nice surprise. first thing I want to do is look for Bucky Skank. It's such a radical piece of music. I remember when this came out, I lived in Maida Vale at that time, and I used to go to Peckham to this reggae, well, they didn't call it reggae then, I think it was called Scar or Bluebeat or something shop, and I found this single, Bucky Skank, which is just so unlike anything else I'd heard. There's just big spaces in it and strange echoes and so on. And I remember playing it to a group of NME journalists who thought it was completely incomprehensible. They just laughed. A year later, they were all smoking trumpet-sized joints, listening to dub reggae. So we've searched, and we can't find Bucky Skank. So for once, I had a single that John Peel didn't have. Possibly the only time that ever happened. But we're going to play another Lee Perry song. I think I saw Roast Fish and Cornbread. Look at that. I should have done this for a job. There it is. It says A Orchid Production.
Clip, clap, clappity, 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 hi. Clip, clap, clappity, 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 hi. Roast fish and cornbread, hey, 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 yeah. Roast fish and cornbread, yeah. Roast fish and cornbread, yeah. Roast fish and cornbread is a vital feed, yo. And from it vitally title, yeah. And from it vitally title, yeah. Hallelujah, and yakra to yo. Dreadnought and peanut too. Skunk it in the backyard, yeah. Rock it in the backyard, yeah, yeah. Dobby tire, Roby tire, Scroby tire, yeah. Roast fish and cornbread, yeah. Roast fish and cornbread, yeah. Dreadnought and peanut, yeah. Peanut and dreadnought, yeah. Skunk it in the backyard, hey, hey. Rock it in the backyard, hey. Skip doop ba ba de ba ba boo doo this is it. Skibby va ba ba be do this ava. Talking about roast fish and cornbread, hey. Roast fish and cornbread, yeah, yeah. Dreadnought and peanut, hey, hey.
This is Brian Eno, and you're listening to BBC Radio 6 Music.
6 Music. This is BBC Radio
6 Music.
BBC News at 1:30, I'm Jason Kay.
Labour's new leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has said he'll try to persuade his colleagues to back the scrapping of Britain's Trident nuclear weapons system, but acknowledged he couldn't rule out members of the shadow cabinet voting to keep it. As Labour delegates gather for their annual conference in Brighton, the party's deputy leader, Tom Watson, who wants to keep Trident, expects that Labour MPs will be given a free vote on the issue.
I can't get to a point where I can tell you we're united on Trident because we have different views. In that case, it's better for me to be honest with you about that and honest with the British people about where we stand. But Jeremy has said he seeks to persuade us. I seek to persuade him too on this one.
David Cameron's heading to New York to tell world leaders that there should be a transition to a new Syrian leader to replace President Assad. The United Nations meeting comes as France confirmed it's become the latest country to launch airstrikes against Islamic State militants in Syria. A 74-year-old man's been found dead at his home in Northampton. Police are treating his death as murder. 2 teenage boys have been arrested over a fire at a mosque in Morden in South London yesterday. Police are questioning a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. More than 40 health professionals have signed a letter urging the government not to scrap free school lunches offered to all infants in England. Money for the scheme, championed by Nick Clegg when he was Deputy Prime Minister, isn't protected. One of those who signed the letter was Dr. Michael Nelson.
On average, a school lunch is 50 calories fewer than in a packed lunch. Over the course of a year, that's 2 kilograms of growth. So if we want fewer children to become obese, and the rates are still 20% higher than they were a few years ago, then it's important that we start to reduce their total energy intake.
The Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka has been won by the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton. He's now 48 points ahead in the championship with 5 races to go. That's the 6 Music News for now. The next update for you will be at 2:30 here on 6 Music.
This is BBC Radio 6 Music.
6 Music.
6 Music.
Ramses the second is dead, my love. He's left from Memphis for heaven. Top has taken him in the solar bark and walked him to new celestial shores. Ramses the second is dead, my love. He's wandering the plains where the blessed live. Tom and Ra and Socaris too are taking him on the celestial boat. Ramses the second. Ramses the second.
The Fugs, there are a couple of poets in the band. Tuli Kupferberg and Ed Sanders, I think, were both poets. So the band was a mixture of poets, musicians and sort of junkies, I think. And their guiding spirit was Allen Ginsberg, the beat poet. But what they did, which I think was very beautiful, was they took known poems, for instance Dover Beach, which is by Matthew Arnold, and they made songs around them. So the Fugs was sort of early part of the yippie movement. Yippies were political hippies who thought that the way you would change society was by making it laugh and by ridicule. In the early 70s, and well, the late 60s actually, a new music started coming out of Germany, which was quite different from anything that was going on anywhere else. A lot of the people playing it had come through the Stockhausen experience at Darmstadt. Can were probably the first band. There was a guy called Tony Conrad who was around at that time as well. But what sort of characterised these bands was very accurate and persistent beats, spacious music, not a lot of sound around the beat, urgent, non-professional, non-singerly sounding singing. Can were friends of mine, but there was another band that I really liked a lot called Neu. Klaus Dinger, the drummer, basically had one beat, and it's such a great beat. You still hear it everywhere. It's bum bum jam bum bum jam bum bum jam bum bum jam. And I hope he'll obediently play that beat on this record I'm about to play, and not some entirely different beat to embarrass me. This is called Super. Let's see. That's it. So I've just entered another room which has a loft within it, a sort of mezzanine, and I'm up the top of the ladder looking into, oh, surprise, surprise, a room full of albums. That's all there is around here, rooms full of albums. This one's got quite a lot of tapes in as well, actually. Yep, it's nice up here. Wow.
There's only 3 of these ever made.
Jesus. So what this is an acetate, which means it's a direct cut. It's not a pressing. It's actually something that has come out of a cutting machine. So they're very fragile acetates, which is why eventually you press vinyl. Vinyl is much more robust, but they're very unusual. This one is early Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band. I liked him quite a lot for the period around Clear Spot, and I liked them because they sounded both very complicated and very random. You just couldn't figure out how he'd got anyone to play things like that. Oh, this has got Safe as Milk on it and Mirror Man, so there's all the hits on here.
I got too much time. Too much time. I got too much time to be without love. Too much time. I got too much time. I got too much time. Too much time to be without love. In my life I got a deep devotion, wide as the sky and deep as the ocean. Every one of its waves make me cry. Every bird that goes by gets me high. Sometime when it's late and I'm a little hungry, I heat up some old stale beans, open up a can of sardines, eat crackers and dream about somebody to cook for me. Too much time. 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 Too much time to be without love. In my life I got a deep devotion, wide as the sky and deep as the ocean. Every one of its wings makes me cry. Every bird that goes by gets me high. I got too much time. Too much time. Too much time to be without love. Too much time. Too much time. Too much time. Too much time. Too much time to be without love. Too much time. Oh yeah. Too much time to be without love.
Six Music. You're supposed to take an interest in what's happening now and what's going to happen next.
Ladies and gentlemen, the BBC Music John Peel Lecture.
Musicians need to be heard, judged, and if possible, be paid.
The end point is women being coerced into demonstrative behaviour in order to hold on to their careers.
Now with the internet, it's a good thing that people can choose to hear stuff and investigate it in their own way.
This year, the BBC Music John Peel Lecture will be coming live from the British Library, and Six Music have asked me, Brian Eno, to give it.
Exploring the ecology of culture and its influence on society.
Tonight at 7 on BBC Radio 6 Music. I just found this record, which was really one of the first really interesting electronic music records. In the early 70s, when I started out, synthesizers were just becoming available. And what happened was that, unfortunately, they fell into the hands of keyboard players who treated them as sort of organs, you know, organs with funny sounds on them. I suppose I was the first person who had a synthesizer who couldn't play a keyboard, which meant that I had to do something else with it. I couldn't play anything else. At least the synthesizer didn't have any rules, because, you know, it hadn't existed before, so it was a new instrument. And these guys, Silver Apples, sort of built their own synthesizers. They weren't even really synthesizers they built. They used signals generators and test equipment, basically. The tuning is very inaccurate, but that gives this record a real quality. For me, it was really the the right approach to using electronics. They're not emulating other instruments at all. They're doing something quite new with it. This great song, I Have Known Love. And you can hear the extent of their failure to tune the instrument.
I've burned my fingers on the sun. I've been imprisoned in the moon. I've been imprisoned in the moon. I have known love, and love is one. And I have learned what truth denies. I drank the teardrops from her eyes. I have learned what truth denies. I drank the teardrops from her eyes. And I surrendered much too soon. I surrendered much too soon. I have learned what truth denies. I never heard the warning voice. I never knew I had a choice. I never heard the warning voice. I never knew I had a choice. So I never wanted to return. I never wanted to return. I never heard the warning voice. But I have sailed upon the boat that flew when there was room to float. But I have sailed upon the boat that flew when there was room to float. And I drank out of the magic earth. I drank out of the magic earth. As I sailed upon the boat. And I have slept inside the shade, encircled by the love we made. And I have slept inside the shade, encircled by the love we made. And I've kissed the face of dreams. Yes, I've kissed the face of dreams. I've slept inside the shade, and I have written on the globe that warms the sky with a rainbow. I have written on the globe that warms the sky with a rainbow. I've waded in its golden streams. I've waded in its golden streams. I have written on the globe, and I have danced between the stars to music sung by sweet guitars. And I have danced between the stars to music sung by sweet guitars. I've done some things that can't be done. I've done some things that can't be done. I've danced between the stars, and I have smiled inside the storm, reaching higher to keep warm. And I have smiled inside the storm, reaching higher to keep warm. I've known love, and love is one. I've known love, and love is one. I have smiled inside the storm. I burned my fingers on the sun.
John was such a dependable source of surprises that everybody listened to him, I think, really. He was the person who you could count on to play things that nobody else would play of your own, you know. He played a lot of my stuff. I wasn't particularly aware of it at the time, but Roxy Music, or me and Fripp, or me and David Byrne, though I don't think he particularly liked my music. He was such a snob. I say that with great fondness because I think snobs are very important within a culture. They're people who really care about something enough to want to defend it, you know. And he was like that. He was somebody who had, I think, quite strong opinions. Although he looks very eclectic, there are lots of things he wouldn't touch. I made an album with Robert Fripp, which was actually 2 long pieces, one on each side of an album. It was called No Pussyfooting. And he played it but unfortunately he played the whole thing backwards. In those days we were recording onto tape, and there were two ways of storing tapes. One was called heads out and one was called tails out, and it was just depends on whether you ran the tape off onto that reel or onto that reel. We had the tape tails out, I think, and the BBC convention at the time was heads out. Anyway, the tape went to them and they just put it on like it was, and he played the whole album backwards. But during the transmission I phoned the BBC because I heard it. I thought, oh my God, they've got it backwards. But the lady on reception didn't believe me. And so it just carried on playing. And then about half an hour later he played the other side, also backwards. There must have been a lot of disappointed people who went out to buy the album. I'm looking for Richard and Linda Thompson album called I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, which for me is the, oh here it is, which is sort of the peak of English folk rock, I suppose. I absolutely love this album. I think she's a great singer, and I think he's possibly the best guitar player that England ever produced. And actually I like everything about this album. It's recorded by a guy called John Wood at this studio in Chelsea called Sound Techniques. It was a very interesting studio because it was like one of those old American studios where the microphones were in one position and the drum kit was in one position, sort of nailed to the floor. I remember John Wood had very little equipment in there, but he really, really understood it so well. I don't remember when this came out. It says 1973. Okay, so this was sort of contemporary with our first albums. It's the kind of thing that we were probably slightly sneery about at the time, but it's so perfect in a way, this album, and so beautifully understated, and every ingredient on it is so lovely. You know, the bass player, the drummer, Richard and Linda, they're all perfect. The engineering is of a class of its own, so I had to admit they'd done it. This song is called Withered and Died.
This cruel country has driven me down, teased me and lied, teased me and lied. I've only sad stories to tell to this town. My dreams have withered and died. Once I was bending the tops of the trees, kind words in my ear, kind faces to see. Then I struck up with a boy from the west, played run and hide, played run. water so wide, steal from the bed of some good friend of mine. My dreams are withered and dried. If I was a butterfly
It's funny, I've always liked John Peel. I never knew him very well. I had met him a few times, but I feel I know him much better now. I got a better sense of who he was as a person. Now I'm thinking about the lecture, and so I've been thinking about him more and more, and he was really at the centre of everything, actually. He was putting so many things together. And I think he was really the first person who kind of realised, A, that popular music was serious, that there was something going on there, you know, it wasn't just kind of something silly for the kids to do, and B, that it could be a place where people could really meet and talk to each other through. But it became a sort of the centre of a conversation, really. So the last thing I'm going to play is actually probably one of the earlier recordings that we've heard today. When I was at college, there was a big crossover between what was going on in experimental music and what was happening in art colleges. In fact, most of the experimental composers of the time, Cornelius Cardew, Gavin Bryars, Christian Wolff from America, other people, they were not employed in English music schools, who couldn't see the point of them at all. They were employed in the art schools. So the art schools were the sort of crucible where a lot of this music was being born. And one of those people was the composer Cornelius Cardew. He had a band called AMM. I can't really say what it was. Some of the people came out of jazz, but it was a post-jazz experience, I think. I went to several of their concerts, and the interesting thing about these concerts was that 30 people went to them, and they were always the same 30 people. Michael Nyman was always there. At that time, Michael wasn't composing, he was writing about music. Yeah, there was just a tiny little group of us, and we always met at those concerts. And I'm sure we were all at this concert. This is AMM music. Oh, and it's not at 45. Nearly made a John Peel style mistake there.
You've been listening to Brian Eno at Peel